Welcome to Postcards, a brief look at people, places, the arts and curiosities from around the world. On today's show, one of Cezanne's stolen works is recovered. George Stubbs' classic study goes under the hammer. An archaeological dig uncovers renewed interest in Alfraed the Great. We look at the Scots Guard in miniature. And 3 centuries of tea are celebrated. But to start, auction house Sotheby's has one of Van Gogh's most important drawings up for auction. But this is a drawing with a difference and a very checkered history. Its original owner was Max Silberberg of Breslau, a Holocaust victim who was forced to sell his art collection by the Nazis in 1935. The drawing found its way to Berlin's National Gallery, where it remained until recently. Once its history came to light, though, it was handed over to a British relative of the original owner. L'Olivette, Le Beau, is a marvellous portrayal of an olive grove, executed in the summer of 1889, when he was living in Saint-Remy, Provence, in the south of France. It was a particularly significant period of Van Gogh's life. In Germany in 1935, the Nazis forced the owner to include the drawing in an auction of looted artworks. It then went into the National Gallery of Berlin. L'Olivette was the subject of a restitution ruling, whereby works of art looted by the Nazis are being returned to their rightful owners. Sotheby's expects the pen and ink drawing to fetch between $2.4 to $3.2 million US. This still life of a pitcher and fruit was painted by the French impressionist Paul Cézanne at the height of his masterly talents in 1890. Critics regard it as one of his finest works, pointing the way forward to Cubism. But the painting, auctioned at Sotheby's Impressionist sale, was only recovered recently. A New York family, Backwin, had it in their collection for many years before it was stolen from them in 1978. The Art Loss Register that helped find the missing Cezanne provides a central reference point for tracing lost works of art from around the world. It was set up in London by insurance companies and the art trade. Stolen objects are reported daily to the register. They come from the international police organisation Interpol, based in Lyon, from the FBI and from national police forces. But they also come from the insurance industry. 390 insurance companies around the world register their losses, along with uninsured private individuals. The register has had great success, with over $100 million worth of stolen art and antiques being recovered during the 9 years of its existence. Thanks to the register, the Backwin family can look forward to netting an estimated $20 million US for the Cezanne when it goes under the hammer. It's considered one of his most magnificent paintings. Yet this life-size portrait of a dog has seldom been seen in public. So there was huge interest and excitement from the art world when the hammer fell on a final bid topping $3.6 million US for George Stubbs' classic study of a Newfoundland dog. The buyer was an anonymous telephone bidder. Stubbs was considered the greatest animal painter in Britain, possibly the greatest animal painter of all time. Art experts say the painting is in remarkable condition. Painted at the end of Stubbs' life and hidden from the world, it has remained in the same family since the 1800s. Art specialists say Stubbs painted it at a time when many English artists were making their mark in the art world. Other paintings offered for sale included Sir William Beechley's portrait of Archdeacon Stuckery and his family. It went for over $353,000 US. John Herring's portrait of Mr. Holdsworth's chestnut racer led a field of other great British artists. King Alfraed the Great in his most enduring guise, that of statesman, Christian and soldier. Erected 1,000 years after his death, the statue tells us how revered he was still in 1901. The popularity of Alfred, the only English monarch to be dubbed the Great, has waned over the generations. But today, this 9th century Saxon king is experiencing something of a revival. Entitled London's Forgotten King, a major exhibition at the Museum of London celebrates the 1150th anniversary of Alfred's birth and the 1100th anniversary of his death. Modern London owes a lot to Alfred the Great. The original Saxon settlement to the west of the old Roman world city was destroyed by the Danes and could have been left to decline. But in 886, Alfred founded a new town, this time within the defences of the Roman wall to protect it from further raids. Many of the streets in this part of the modern city of London, from Cheapside down to the River Thames, still follow Alfred's civic plan. The Roman street plan was long forgotten, buried and overgrown. Alfred laid out new streets with new buildings on them, but it took about 100 years to be established properly. For a long time it looked like a partly finished building site, with streets but no houses on them. However, it does seem to be the inception of the city we know today. Saxon wood and pieces of old ships were used to build the London founded by Alfred. Such relics are amazing finds and have helped archaeologists clear up inaccurate assumptions they had made about the location of the original Saxon settlement. Alfred's London was no capital city, more a trading outpost. The king's power base was in Winchester, then a major city southwest of London. Not much survives from the 800s, but this line of trees next to Winchester Cathedral marks the site of the royal palace. Winchester was the capital of Alfred's Kingdom of Wessex, one of 7 great Saxon kingdoms. All were vulnerable to the ferocious attacks from across the North Sea. The seaborne raiders were Alfred's greatest military threat. Only Wessex survived, and that because of the king's military strategies. Wessex was extremely rare and unusual, not just in England, but in the whole of northern Europe in this period. Between a row of homes and a leisure centre car park in Winchester, archaeologists are excavating the site of 12th century Hyde Abbey in search of traces of King Alfred. It's yet another indicator of renewed interest in the man known mostly through myths. The nearby restored gateway is all that remains of Winchester's Hyde Abbey. It was Alfred's wish to be buried within its walls. The Winchester community has been enlisted to help with the dig, but it's not the first attempt to find Alfred. There have been 4 major disturbances to this site over the centuries, each showing a different attitude to the monarch. The first was the desecration of Hyde Abbey, under Henry VIII's general order to dissolve monasteries in 1539 and strip them of their wealth. His commissioners identified 3 burials directly in front of the high altar, which apparently produced little lead plaques saying Alfred Ailswitha and Edward the Elder. Henry had no interest whatsoever in his Saxon predecessor. In 1788, this was the site of a prison whose inmates were charged with digging holes to bury the abbey remains destroyed by Henry VIII. This work uncovered 3 stone coffins, the primary one encased in lead. These were most probably the 3 royal burials, but the major discovery wasn't valued. The monarchy at this time was generally unpopular. Records show that the prisoners smashed up the coffin, stripped off and sold the lead, and then threw the smashed up coffin and human remains back into the pit. This carved clay pipe spout found on the site was taken from an excavation of 1866 by antiquarian John Mellor, during a time when Alfred was again extremely popular. New evidence from the dig proves he had recovered monks' bones, incorrectly claiming them to be Alfred's. He found 3 skulls which he took on a Victorian travelling show, Pay Your Penny and See the King. 30 years later, future Winchester Mayor Alfred Bowker's excavations attempted to clarify Mellor's. Such was the love of Alfred then that Bowker, who was given the king's first name, was able to raise an international subscription to erect this famous statue. The dig has yielded pipes, fragments of masonry and even a piece of human hip bone, currently being scientifically dated. It's also achieved what no previous attempt could, to firmly establish the site of the high altar, Alfred's burial place. Alfred's coffin, it seems, was placed in the abbey's choir area some 40 years after his death. Since this was an area expressly reserved for the monks and access barred to the public, This act could be seen as a political statement by the new Norman monarchies who succeeded Alfred. Being buried in that area of the church, he is being physically excluded from his people. The ancient monastery can now be preserved and marked out, possibly like this, to honour an ancient king who really did seem to care for his people. Alfred had important Latin texts and histories translated into Old English to foster literacy in the common man. London's law courts bear the image of Alfred as lawmaker. His 9th century written laws were reissued in the Middle Ages and still form the basis of English common law today. Alfred commissioned many walled and defended cities throughout his kingdom. No peasant would ever be more than 30 miles from refuge. With such tight defence and a reorganisation of army conscription, Alfred withstood the Danes and ultimately united the Saxon and other kingdoms into England. With the 8-week dig almost complete, a suitable tribute to Alfred the Great and his final resting place is being planned. No doubt it will form the basis of how the 21st century will regard this monarch of another millennium. We'll never know for sure what Alfred actually looked like. These are all images attributed to him by later generations. But historians are clear that the Danish raids were an important crisis in English history, and that the monarch who forged a nation from this dark period truly did earn the accolade, great. The Scots Guards, in miniature. 100 years ago, the Scots Guards Regiment was presented with a state colour by Queen Victoria in commemoration of the Diamond Jubilee of her reign. In celebration of the centenary of that occasion, a special presentation has taken place at Wellington Barracks in London. A military model featuring 200 pieces has been created down to the tiniest detail by W. Britton, a company with an illustrious history in model making. As well as die-cast figures, they still produce white metal skull-cast soldiers, using the traditional sculpting methods and hand painting. The set is complete in every detail and rivals one created in 1953 to commemorate the coronation of Elizabeth II. It's estimated the collection would fetch up to $4,800 US at auction, but it's highly unlikely the regiment will part with it. William Britton, the founder of W. Britton, made his first Scots Guard model in 1897. They've remained in the company's range ever since. Between 1685 and 1899, the Scots Guards won 17 major battle honours. From the presentation of the state colour in 1899 to 1992, they won a further 43, culminating in the Falklands War. The regiment is currently serving in Northern Ireland. It's the nation's favourite tipple, more than 4 cups a day for every man, woman and child in Britain. And now the British have gone as far as to celebrate Fine Tea Week. As their tastes diversify and expand, so does the range of specialty teas to satisfy them. The global market leader in specialty teas is Twinings. It's one of the oldest tea companies in the world, and its store on the Strand in London has sold fine teas for nearly 3 centuries. The premises have altered little since the 1700s, when shop numbers were yet to be introduced. To make it distinctive, it was adorned with 2 Chinese figures and a golden lion. Twinings was started 293 years ago, when a young man by the name of Thomas Twining set up a coffee house in the London Strand. There were between 2,000 and 2,500 coffee houses in the area, and because of the intense competition, he chose to sell quality tea to differentiate his coffee house from all the rest. The shop's tiny museum charts its own success story, shadowing the growing popularity of tea in England and its infiltration into the country's coffee houses. The wife of King Charles II introduced tea drinking in 1662, after tea first arrived in Europe from China. Afternoon tea became a new ritual in English daily life, and tea usurped ale as the drink accompanying mealtimes. The practice of tipping came from boxes in coffee houses inscribed with the letters TIP to ensure promptness. By the mid-19th century, clipper ships raced from China to London to bring the first tea for auction. And by the end of that century, tea growing in India had been perfected and the great English tea marketing companies founded. Twinings' headquarters in Andover sits halfway between London and Bristol, historically Britain's principal tea ports. Today, the company still has a royal warrant it won in 1837 and exports tea to 96 countries around the world. The processing and grading of teas is exhaustive, but the teas aren't ready to be packaged and sold until the skills of the tea taster enter the picture. Teas from as many as 20 different tea gardens might be blended to produce a precise flavour. Exactly the same amount of water and leaves are infused for 6 minutes precisely in a special ceramic container. The liquid is poured off, then the methodical tasting procedure begins to judge the brew's colour and clarity. The taster's well-seasoned palate can detect the slightest variation in the standard they see. Every time a tea bush is plucked, you get a different colour, a different taste and a different price. In order to give the consumer a consistent product, a blend is required. Having perfected the blend in miniature, it's recorded and passed over to the main blending hall. 5 more samples will be taken for tasting before the teas receive a final seal of approval. In the blending hall, automation takes over. The tea is blended according to the approved mixture and made ready for consumers' teapots throughout the world. Two-thirds of the tea we drink is still bought in tea bags and brewed in a mug. Twinings' most modern tea bag machine produces an extraordinary 2,000 bags per minute. These days, the choice is endless. 300 years on, British tea drinkers are still on a voyage of discovery. While the Christian world geared up to celebrate the second millennium, Hindus were well into their third. At the spectacular Swami Narayan Mandir in northwest London, 50,000 people are gathered here from all over Britain to celebrate the start of year 2056 in the Hindu calendar. The festivities begin with devotional hymns and food offerings to Lord Rama. This is the second day of the celebrations of Diwali, which mark the victory of Lord Rama over the demon king Ravana in Hindu mythology, and Rama's return as king after 14 years in exile. In the main hall of the temple, people gather for the climax of the New Year celebrations. People, young and old, have spent days preparing food to be offered in the temple. A total of over 800 vegetarian dishes, traditional and not so traditional, are displayed on this 100-foot platform. The food display, called Uncaught, is the largest to be seen anywhere, including in India. It's an opportunity for people to ask the gods and deities to make the new year a prosperous and peaceful one for all. Diwali is known as the Festival of Lights. In a ceremony called Aarti, candles are lit and waved before the deities. If the food symbolises pledging the fruits of a person's efforts during the year, Aarti symbolises giving of one's own self to God. This moving tribute will be repeated several times during the day to give all a chance to share in this, the climax of the Hindu New Year's devotions. And finally, from the sublime to the ridiculous. Feast your eyes on this. 600 kilograms of chocolate, moulded exactly into the shape of a motor racing car. To be exact, it's the Formula One car driven by motor racing great Alain Prost. It was supposed to be the showstopper at this, London's International Festival of Chocolate, but somewhere on its journey from France it quite literally broke down. Chocolatier Pascal Giraud then had the painstaking task of putting the 40,000-pound chunk of chocolate back together again. But if an entire car made of chocolate can't tantalise your taste buds, there's plenty more to choose from. This is Britain's biggest ever international chocolate fair. Chocolate, they say, is the food of love, so perhaps it was fitting that another highlight was this massive chocolate cake. Large enough to serve several hundred people, it comes complete with flowers and Gothic gargoyles. Had enough of drooling? Well, get tasting. There are samples galore, everything from chocolate cookies to ice cream. There's even chocolate and chili beans for the more adventurous palate. But whatever your taste, it's a chocolaholic's dream come true. And with top chefs on hand, there's no shortage of ideas on what you can do with it. And if all that tasting has really stirred up a thirst, there's always the chocolate stout. At the end of all that, maybe you need a rest. Why not enjoy a bath? In chocolate, of course. And that's all for today. Join us again next time for a postcard look at interesting people, places and the arts.